Authenticity is a luxury. Where and how to be authentic when you have limited power. One of my goals is helping others to show up as the person they want to show up as, because the distractions don't just come from others, they also come from us. It's all about, how do I show up the way I want to show up in this moment, fully aware, because I'm no fool of the power dynamics around me. I would not advocate for a cognition-based notion of empathy. I would advocate for a controlled notion of empathy that ebbs and flows from emotional to cognitive, depending on the circumstances.
Emotional regulation is really, really hard especially for
Yes.
people who are empaths or people who are tend to absorb a lot of emotional energy. And it does require a certain amount of skill sets and just an awareness.
Empathy is what? The power you gain from your awareness of the people around you. That is power. Never allow that to be disempowering. That is power. One of life's great existential questions is, how do you, especially as you find success, remain grounded? For me, again, it comes back to family or people who are like family, because the biggest how is to try to surround myself with people who would not only die for me, but would kill for me, but who also are extremely real with me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. I'm your host, Celine Chenoy. Thank you to all of you who return every week to tune in to become a better version of yourself. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and rate our show if you enjoyed this episode. Imagine if the ability to change your life led with intention and building connections with others was found at the crossroads of two timeless ideas: Stoicism and empathy. My guest, Shermin Kruse, is convinced that this can be achieved. She will showcase how to harmonize resilience with kindness, helping us find the clarity and strength needed to face the challenges of our current world. Shermin Kruse is an award-winning idea curator, a globally recognized negotiation consultant, law professor, and author whose transformative work in empathy, stoicism, and complex negotiation has influenced audiences from corporate boardrooms to university classrooms and international stages. As a partner at the prestigious law firm Barack Ferrazzano, she spent nearly 2 decades representing Fortune 500 clients. Shermin is also the author of the critically acclaimed novel Butterfly Stitching, the textbook Global Transactions and Regulation, produced and scripted over 80 TEDx talks and performances, and given 3 viral TEDx talks on advocacy, stoicism, and strategic empathy. In today's discussion, Shermin will demonstrate how the seemingly opposing forces of stoicism and empathy, when combined, can transform your life. We'll explore strategies and perspectives to tackle challenges, foster meaningful connections, and make ethical choices in a world that is becoming more complex. Hello, Shermin. How are you doing?
I am doing great, Celine, and you did such a great job saying my name, which I greatly appreciate. I know I have one of those names that is impossible and difficult to pronounce and spell.
Yeah, you would think it would be easy because it's just two syllables, right? I mean, I don't know
Right.
why
Yeah.
it would trip people up, but
I
you
don't
know
know.
what? I try my best. I do. But thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. And it's great to have you with us today. I just wrapped up reading your latest book on Stoic empathy. And I must say that I'm fascinated by how you were able to blend two seemingly contrasting ideas in a way that I've never thought about. So I can't wait to explore it with you further and discover what exactly inspired you to write it.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored that you took the time to read it. I have to say, I am in the middle of the press tour, and a very small percentage of the people actually read the work. So it's a privilege to be speaking with someone who has. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I'm a reader and I like to read at least skim most of the book and get a general idea about what it's all about and really um, understand what the soul of the book is. Because,
Yeah,
I feel like I'm doing a disservice to you, my guest, and my audience if I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's just
thank
what
you.
I do.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
so let's start with learning about your origin story, Sherman. You were born in Tehran amidst the
Yes.
Iranian Revolution's turmoil before your family immigrated to Canada. I want to know, how did those early experiences shape your outlook in life?
I think everyone's early experiences shape their outlook in life in one way or another. For me, it was very multifaceted, Celine. On the one hand, I was taught adaptability at an extremely young age because we were in a position where there were government impositions placed upon us that didn't exist 5 minutes ago, right? They hadn't become cultural norms yet. And so we had to adapt to them. And then we had to adapt out of them when we came inside the house necessarily reflecting the way that we felt or our moral values. And so adapting in and out to these two different environments as a child, and then also all of the middle ground. What do you do when you get inside a taxi? Who are you then? What do you do when you're at a hair salon? Who are you then? How about when you're in a hammam? How about when you're at a birthday party, right? And then on top of that, we had the Iran-Iraq War, which was a very, very violent war and lasted 10 years. By the time I left Iran in 88, I was 11 years old at the time, there were up to 6 missile attacks a day. And so there's a lot of adaptation there. That's adaptation to the noise, adaptation to the chaos, to the fear, but also just to the energy shortages and bread lines and inconveniences that come along with school cancellations, things like that. And so I was born and bred to adapt. And what I learned more than during that time is authenticity can be extremely dangerous in the wrong environment. And that's been something that I have grappled with most of my life as I've gained greater environmental freedoms and greater capability to be authentic. But I also learned one thing you can always count on is your family. My
Mhm.
family were my saviors. They were my emotional solace growing up, and they were my one thing that was the same, no matter where I went. And they were my North Star. And so I also learned as I grew up that I needed to find my North Stars and make sure that I had those with me and to never ever take those for granted.
Wow, that's quite a story. I mean, going through all that instability and the turmoil, and I can't even imagine what it would have been like. How did you how did you get over that? Like, how did you remain grounded and find a place for yourself in this fragmented reality that you found yourself in? Especially growing up as a kid, man, uh, you're so impressionable.
Yes. My friend, I don't know that I was grounded. I often literally thought of myself as floating above and seeing the world taking place beneath me as though I was looking at it in the perspective of the third person. And that was an escape mechanism, but it was also a coping mechanism, right? The reality is my path to being grounded, which continues. I call it, it's actually more of a practice than a path, because in this society too, I live in a highly commercial, distracting, society where vanity and commercialism and, the desire to fit in and be successful and have your kids go to the right schools or whatever these things are, those things are real and they're pervasive. And so I really find the work in being grounded to be more of a work, more of a practice like yoga or meditation. I think I've gotten better after, I'm pushing 50 now. So after 50 years, I'd hope that I've gotten better, but I hope to get better still. And as to the how, I would say that is an extremely difficult question. I actually think that is one of life's great existential questions is how do you, especially as you find success, how do you remain grounded? For me, again, it comes back to family or people who are like family, because the biggest how is to try to surround myself with people who would not only die for me, but would kill for me, but who also are extremely real with me. And they call me out when I'm being an idiot. And that happens from time to time. And I have to receive that from someone who I trust more than anything in the world. It can't come from a stranger on the street and it can't come from a competitor in a race. It needs to come from that person because the reliability of that person in my life has proven to me over decades that they are pure of heart in what it is they're saying. And so really others. I feel like I would get lost if I didn't have the very ground and the very walls that the people around me who are my literal family or my family provide for me. And I think that's so important to search for that. And some of it came with being born and some of it I had to find.
Yeah, I agree with you. Having family or people like family is so essential in keeping us sane because we are exposed to so much change and flux, and we can be, bedazzled by the next shiny object. And we need
Mhm.
people to call us out and remind us about who we are. You mentioned something about authenticity, and that
Mhm.
your definition of authenticity is quite different from the mainstream definition. Can you please expand on that?
I think authenticity is a luxury. I think if we can find ourselves in a situation that is an extraordinary gift. And I've in my life have found it to be very difficult in most circumstances to show up in that way without cost. And I have found that it takes a certain level of power, a certain level of control, a certain level of self-certainty and confidence in order to be able to do that, that most people just don't have available to them. I mean, if I'd been my authentic self growing up in the Islamic Republic of Iran and talking about how my parents were like making alcohol in the bathtub and we were listening to Michael Jackson records, my dad would have gone to jail. I mean, this is not a joke. It's not. And by the way, the Iranian women are out there. They're brave. They're incredible. They're out there every day being their authentic selves and going to jail. These are real consequences. But similarly, in America, in the corporate world, showing up with, your hair in a particular way, your clothes smelling of a particular type of food, your earrings a particular type of way, these things have consequences and they have impact. And as you gain power and leadership and control in your life and in your situation, you have far greater freedom to exhibit that authenticity. So, what's really interesting to me is where and how to be authentic when you have limited power. How do you do that? And I mean, the idea of a constant sense of self, I think, is sort of ridiculous anyway. I think we sort of morph with the moment as humans, but there is something, right? There's something about us that's our usness. There's something about you that is your you-ness, that is Celine, right? There's something there, whether you want to call it a mind or a will or a soul or a spirit or just a constant sense of ego, right? Whatever it might be. And being able to tune into that despite the adaptivity that is required for success in today's world. That's where my focus and interest lies. And that's where a lot of my work in empathy, which is like awareness of the room, read the room, but also stoicism and control over yourself so that you can read yourself and control yourself, where a lot of that comes in. And one of my goals is helping others to show up as the person they want to show up as, because the distractions don't just come from others, they also come from us, from our own
Hmm.
emotional impulses, from our own useless resentment or anger or flickering of a light within ourselves. They might not necessarily reconcile with our value system or who it is that we are in our core. People act contrary to who they are all the time. And so for me, it's all about how do I show up the way I want to show up in this moment, fully aware, because I'm no fool of the power dynamics around me, right? Fully aware and therefore willing to make this compromise, but not this one, right? And
Yeah.
showing up still at core true to myself.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that showing up as ourself is context dependent, and it's a conscious decision we make based on the power dynamics we find ourselves in or the specific situations we're in.
100%. Yes.
Okay.
Because the reality is, listen, if you're in pain, or if you're distracted, or if you're ill, or if you're very angry, you're going to do things that you wish you hadn't done. You're going to do things or behave in ways or have thoughts that don't reflect the you that you want to be or that you think you really are, right? And yet you're the one who experienced them. Nobody imposed, right? They are a distraction. So it is shedding those distractions so that we can tune in with our core self. So that at a minimum, no matter how much adaptability we have to do to succeed, at a minimum, we do show up in that way for ourselves. Sure, we might have smiled when we didn't feel like smiling because we felt we had to, but we left the conversation satisfied with who we
Hmm.
were during that conversation.
Is that why we need the skills of both stoicism and empathy so that we can reach to
Ah,
the core of
interesting
who we
question.
are? Yeah, let's get into that because they are opposing forces or they seem like opposing forces. But you think that they're actually symbiotic companions on the journey of self-discovery. So yeah, let's dig into that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I was more speaking very existentially to like, the grander notions of life, but I do think that stoicism and empathy as symbiotic notions as you've described them are a core component towards that authentic self. I also think they're essential to find your power in this world in a manner that's consistent with your integrity. And the reason is that I have found myself in a multitude of situations as a parent, as a leader, where my awareness of the people around me is precisely what led me to find my control. It is not the other way around. I wasn't distracted by the needs of those around me, but I was aware of them. And that awareness enlightened me as to how I should be in that moment. And that's where I see that symbiotic relationship between that empathic awareness and that self-control, that stoic self-control.
Yeah, and you describe empathy in a very unconventional way. I mean, you say it's the type of empathy that you're positing is based on cognition rather than emotion. Um, and I want you to tell us, like, looking at empathy this way, how can it help someone navigate the trenches they find themselves in? Because I have not heard about a kind of empathy based on our thoughts or being strategic about it. So, yeah, tell us more about that.
Mhm. So here's what I would say. I would not advocate for a cognition-based notion of empathy. I would advocate for a controlled notion of empathy that ebbs and flows from emotional to cognitive, depending on the circumstances. So, for example,
Sure.
if I am the mother of a child who has been wounded, who's been shot, let's say, 7 times. I empathically will feel the pain of my child. I feel pain. My nervous system actually experiences pain. It doesn't experience being shot, but it experiences pain. Their pain is pain in my heart. That is significant to the core of our humanity, and that is not to be reduced. If I am that child's surgeon and the child has just been rolled into the ER, I still need to be aware of where it hurts. And I probably should have some clue. Like if it was the dad who shot them, I shouldn't release that kid back into the custody of the dad. In other words, it's not enough to just patch the kid up. I must care and I must have a general awareness. But I can't feel the pain. It might actually prohibit my ability to save my patient. I have to be really careful in how I understand it. And so this is not a dual, it's not a dichotomy, right? It's not I'm either emotional or I am cognitive. In fact, I would say nobody is purely cognitive unless they're a psychopath. Because once you start to
True.
like understand the people around you, how do you help but have some sort of emotional connection? But if they're a hostile counterpart or the patient you have to treat to whom you have a responsibility, it's very different than if they're your sister or your kid or your father, right? And so this spectrum and your ability to move in and out of it, and and sometimes maybe you've experienced this. You enter a conversation, in a particular way, trying to understand someone, but over time you feel your walls breaking down. You feel a trust beginning to build. You feel a vulnerability within you feeling safer than it would have upon first encounter, correct? And so you can experience their pain in a different way when they were a stranger to you. And it is that ability to ebb and flow that I call strategic empathy. And that ability takes a massive amount of emotional regulation, and it takes a massive amount of emotional awareness, right? And that's the goal. That's where I land. That's where I want people to land. The book is far more basic than that. It's just like, hey, here's general tools for empathic awareness, and here's general notions of self-control and general tools for emotive control. But really, at the end of the day, that is what the Buddhist monk would do. That is what the samurai warrior would do. It's also what a good surgeon would do or a good teacher, right?
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the upcoming launch of my new book titled The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world, which highlights a profound yet often unexplored part of your identity that holds the key to everything from answering your biggest questions to finding deeper meaning and joy in everyday life. Visit thenomadicsoulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or to buy a copy. Yeah, thank you for explaining that so beautifully. Yeah, I can't help but think that it is hard because you just said like emotional regulation is really, really hard for, especially for
Yes,
people who are empaths or people who are like tend to absorb a
yes.
lot of emotional energy. And it does require a certain amount of skill sets and just an awareness. How do we begin that journey?
Yeah. I appreciate that. And that's really what the book is. It's to help folks begin the journey. So there's a lot of tools and a lot of exercises. I like to think of two very concrete examples that are sort of the opposite of each other. The first one, in Stoicism, it's called discomfort embracing. In my example, I'm just going to call it getting punched in the face. Okay, I know that's very visceral and guttural, but it's very real. If you are a champion boxer, you can get punched in the face 20 times and maintain your wits about you. in that ring. Know who is where, who's tired, who has what skill set, how tired you are, have some away, like it's really incredible what these people can do because they've literally grown accustomed to maintaining their wits about them after getting punched in the face. And then the second example is in meditation. For people who can experience, even just sit in meditation for hours and hours, and even just the physical discomfort of the body during that
Mm.
time, for that pain to be controlled, that there's no violence being committed against you, right? But the
Yeah.
pain is no different. And pain from others would be the same. In fact, easier. Excuse me, more difficult in a lot of ways than that physical pain. So I try to conceive of it in the physical sense because it's easier to manage, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then expand, yeah, and then expand from that to the emotional. So the goal is to get to be the Buddhist monk, right? Or the boxer. I honestly admire them both equally. One of them suffers brain damage, the other one has an enlightened brain. So I would say if you're going to choose career paths, one might be a better one. But in terms of control, it's really incredibly consistent between the two. How do you get started? You get started the same way you get started in either of those practices, right? Which is practice. You begin with far simpler tasks. Today, I'm going to take a 3-minute ice bath, right? Today, I am going to make an appointment with my dental hygienist, which for me is the
Hmm.
equivalent of a 35-minute ice bath, right? Whatever it might be for you that is uncomfortable, that is safe, that doesn't harm others, that exposes you to that space so that when you are placed in it, out of control, out of your control, when you're placed in it because someone else placed you in it, because you got punched in the face or your child did, right? How do you, in that moment, react with immediacy, clarity, right? Thoughtfulness, and wisdom? And reeling in pain is in that moment a luxury you cannot afford, but later
Right.
maybe a luxury you can afford, right? And so you can process it at a later time in a different way. But right now, and by the way, those of us who have kids, we've all done this. We've all had like a kid with a head wound. The head bleeds like, oh my gosh, it's insane. And it's the child is covered, their face is covered with blood, their hands are covered with blood. They're freaking out. That's a terrifying sight, but it's really a tiny little gash on the forehead. Need to put pressure on it until they get stitches, right? And
Yeah.
so, but that requires a certain level of calm and
Yeah.
wit and clarity in that moment. And so to regain that, you go back to those practices. So what are my practices of self-control? What are the tools? The Stoics relied a lot on things like discomfort embracing, habituation, and then they also had other practices. One of the things, for example, that they did is they carried these coins around with them all the time, the memento mori coins, to remind you that you will die. It sounds really morbid, but it's the opposite. It's actually a reminder that you are not dead yet. And in that moment, if your child's face is bloody, in that moment, when you can focus immediately on, but they're standing, they're breathing, they're talking, they're screaming. So more or less, they seem fine. Where's the source of the blood? How do I control it? How do I maintain it? What is there around me that I can use to press on the child's forehead? Like these are things that you can go through because the alternative is not true. And so you have these actions that are available to you that are at your disposal because you're able to maintain that perspective. The
Mm.
Stoics also have something called dichotomy of control, which I talk about in the book, which is what can't I control and what can I control? In this moment, what is in my realm, right? In my circle? Because listen, power dynamics are real.
Yeah.
And if my kid really was shot 7 times, it's not just about putting pressure on the wound. And there's a lot more beyond my control than if it's just the scary sight of blood. And I need to be able to formulate and evaluate that. So I know whether to leave the child to run to my phone to press 911. That's important, right? And so being able to make that call and make that decision in the moment is important. So the Stoics talk a lot about that as well. So that's that's really where the second half of the book is. It's really geared toward and dedicated toward helping people get started on that emotional self-regulation journey. Whereas the first half of the book is about, look, this is what strategic empathy is, but also this is how you read the room, right? This is how you gain information because it's not just about bleeding child. It's also about intense negotiation in a corporate setting, right? How can I tell when the other person is lying? How can I tell
Sure.
when, right? So it's also that, or just traffic. How do I swerve immediately out of the way when a crazy guy comes out of nowhere, but not get frustrated in everyday traffic, right? So
Yeah.
that it's also like plays itself out in those everyday moments that we experience in our corporate lives, in our professional lives, and in our personal
Hmm.
lives as well. And a lot of that I demonstrate through the big stuff, but really it's about the application to the little stuff on a daily basis, wherein we can find greater success as people who are living full lives.
Thanks for explaining that. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I'm sure the parents listening here can relate to the the challenges you face when your child is injured. I guess the only way I can relate to that is as a podcaster because sometimes
Mm.
we have a life and we go through, the ups and downs, and I would have something really difficult happen, the first half of my day, and then I can't cancel my interview. So, but I have to go in and put that aside and get focused and, have that situational awareness and to really focus on what my guest is saying to me. And that anything that's performative requires the same sort of frame of mind where you're able
I
to
agree.
neutralize any emotion that you're feeling or any pain or distractions that are lingering from your day. And that's how it has helped me, this form of, empathy, the cognitive empathy. I think that has served me really well in this particular area of my life.
I love the way that you put that so much because that is such a beautiful and apt characterization. I would say you don't have to move forward with the interview. Plenty of people would cancel and their podcast would eventually fail. And that's a re look, that's an
Yeah.
option that's available to you, right?
Yeah, I
And
know.
so yeah, so this is a choice. You're making the choice to work, not submitting to the whim of the moment of I feel like crap, I just want to sit and watch and binge Netflix. God, who doesn't, right?
Yeah.
But I am choosing because my authentic self demands this of me, right? And so, what I am doing through building that practice up in my life, not of having all the time things we're doing that we don't want to do, but that facing the reality that living a life of intentionality and a life of purpose and a life consistent with who we want to be isn't always doing what we want to do whenever we want to do it. That just isn't the
Absolutely.
case, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and sometimes we have power and control beyond that which we thought, if we just will it. We've seen that about human beings, what human beings can endure and what they can recover from. So if they can do that, then Celine, you're absolutely right that you can get through that podcast, but it's difficult. And I
It
think
is.
it's okay to take that pause and say, yeah, I'm in pain. This hurts. And and it is in my control. And I can stand up again like the warrior that I am and get back in the ring. And my pain is mine and it's beautiful and it's real. And for now, I need to release it so that I can focus on this other thing because it's essential to me.
Hmm.
And I matter. What I want matters more than the pain. And that's an extraordinary mental like
Yeah.
framework to have for
There's so
yourself.
much power. There's
It's
so
so much
much
power.
power in that. Like you'd be a force to be reckoned with. I am a little
100%.
concerned though about the younger generations. It seems to be this will seems to be
Yeah.
eroding. And as we are getting more exposed to this world where instant gratification is is becoming, I don't know, coveted. So is that something you are concerned about this sort of mindset not being as prevalent among younger people?
It's such an interesting observation. And I will say, even just anecdotally, as a mother, I have two 14-year-olds, an 11-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So my two 14-year-olds are surrounded by other 14-year-olds, which means I'm surrounded by 14-year-olds all the time. What's incredible to me is the number of young children who are people of privilege, right? They have the golden passport that everybody in the world wants. They're going to the right school, they live in the right neighborhood, they have the right health care, they have the right education, are unhappy. And they are deeply dissatisfied with themselves, right? Unless they get that flash of dopamine from the like on the social media. At the same time, at the same time, I see a group of people who are watching school shootings and burning babies live on their phone at a very tender age, where you used to have to wait till your dad left the house and snuck into his room and found his dirty magazines to get exposed to inappropriate images. Now you just have to
Yeah,
turn to your device and put in the words Japanese bondage, and oh my God,
I
it is
know.
terrifying what
Yeah,
pops up.
it's awful.
So they are also coping with that. And that shows a remarkable kind of strength. And so I think where we need to focus with young people is showing them where they do have it and then
Mhm.
teaching them how to extend it, right? Which is the same thing I do for myself every day, right? Because again, Lord knows this is for me, it's a practice too. Plenty of times I lose control. And so taking this young person and trying to coach them out of that habitual need for the dopamine release into the more long-term gratification by teaching them how to steady their emotion and find their gratitude and their joy on a daily basis. It's a privilege to be able to do that. And from what I've observed, they all can, and they do in some ways. They just don't in a lot of other ways. And so you just need to like redirect them a little bit. And suddenly it clicks for them. And they're really quite adept at it, actually. And they're very resilient, these young people. They're incredible.
Okay. That definitely gives us hope. I'm glad to know that.
You don't seem convinced, though.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know, I see some of the social media posts of Gen Zs and I'm a little bit
Yeah,
concerned when I see
I,
them.
I,
But
I agree. I agree.
I guess
One thing
maybe
you,
it's a
one
small
thing,
sample size I'm seeing. I hope that's the
I,
case.
I don't think it's a small sample size. I think what you're seeing is the reality, but I think what you're seeing
Okay.
is a fleeting thought or a fleeting moment from a
Mm,
child. And I don't know that they wouldn't have had those types of distractions thoughts 20 years
mm,
ago. It's just they couldn't have made them available to the world. So I think
okay.
that what has been taken from us is all the things that social media has taken from our young people, right? But what has been given to us is a perspective to their minds. And that is an extraordinary gift, I think, to be given. And as the adults, right, it is up to us at the end of the day to be the guiding force for these young people. Not too long ago, they might have or sold into the fields, or, they would have had a much worse life than the one they're going to have now, despite social media, right? And so the reality is there's a lot of gains that have come, but yes, it's awful. It's distracting. I myself struggle. Like I keep coming back to me because God knows I like that like on the social media post too.
Yes, yes,
I'm trying
yeah.
to sell
Don't
some
we
books
all?
here. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
we have to keep ourselves in check.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
we do it through modeling. The
Mm,
number of parents who get annoyed at their kids for being on their phones while the parents themselves are on their phones, I think is comical. The number of people who go out to dinner with their children and don't even address them or talk to them, and then expect them to not be on their phones. They're not part of the conversation. They can be part of this digital conversation. Why wouldn't they do that? Right? Like it's not
yeah.
irrational. And so I just think, look, yes, recognize the flaws and go the next step. how do I help these kids get to this space? How do I see the greatness within them, right? That, as we say with Namaste, how do I see the greatness within them? And then how do I allow them to showcase that more and more every day through my example and also through my leadership? Because I don't feel it does any good to just point out the deficiency. They're there for everyone to see. We see it, it's awful. Okay. But it also has this, it also has that. How can I use it to help them get to this next place? And that is the question that I ask. And I think it's a more difficult question. And I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I do think the quest is half the battle.
Mm. So giving them that space for them to blossom and be themselves rather than just be critical of the things that you don't like or appreciate. I think that is such a profound way of parenting and also looking at your kids. So thank you for sharing that. Um,
Oh, well,
so
thank you for saying that.
can you give us a sense of how we can apply Stoic empathy in our personal and professional life? I really want to ground those concepts so that people can really see how it can be applied in their everyday life.
Yeah. So the ways in which I would say apply it in your everyday life is use it among your quest for authenticity, right? Use it as a tool. Empathy is what? The power you gain from your awareness of the people around you. That is power. Never allow that to be disempowering. That is power. When you know someone else's pain, that is information that imagine if you're an alien species and you land on Earth and you can read people's minds and their feelings. Think of what you could accomplish in a negotiation, right? In
Right.
diplomacy, in building peace, in, building community. Like there's
Yeah,
so much that you could do.
if you just listen in the right
Yes.
way. Yeah.
Yes. And then, but what is it that you cannot allow to happen with the listening? You cannot allow the loud feelings, right, to distract you from clarity of wisdom. That doesn't mean you don't feel anything, right? But what it means is, when I talk about cognitive, what it means is our emotions are much more in check. They're still there, but they're much more in check because they might distract us from the wise thing to do at this moment. They can inform
Mm.
us, but they cannot dominate us. That is the distinction. I will allow them to inform me, and there are powerful, powerful forces, but I will not allow them to dominate me because I am more powerful than my own feelings. I just am. I am the master of my domain. These aren't just some things that are some control over how I experience, motivate, ground, elevate, detract, or display my emotions, right? And so then that comes back to your self-control. So really, now think of it literally not being frustrated with the traffic you have on your way to work. How do I not become frustrated with the traffic that I will most certainly have every single day? Because there's a lot of idiot drivers.
Yes.
How how do I, that's my job. For the next 3 weeks, my job is to not get frustrated by traffic. That doesn't mean that it's not inconvenient, right? But it does mean when someone cuts me off, or when there's more traffic than I expected, or even when I'm going to be late for something that I admitted to Celine I'm loath to do, that I come back to what is in my control. The Greeks talk about the archer who is in an archery competition, right? And he's well rested and he's strong and he's well exercised and he has his bow and he has his arrows and everything's in the right place and he shows up on time and he pulls the arrow and he aims. Okay? That's all in his control. And then he releases. Once the arrow is in the air, it is no longer in your control. It doesn't matter who you are or how much power you have in this world or how rightly you prepared for that shot. if where that arrow lands is not in your power, only the preparation is, and the
Yeah.
next arrow, and the next
Yeah.
arrow,
I
right?
love that. I love that.
And
Such a beautiful
so,
metaphor.
yeah, so if we could just like bring that into everyday practices, after I'm done with traffic, maybe I can focus on not yelling at my kids. And
Yeah.
after I'm done with that, maybe I can try not to be frustrated by the colleague who is constantly deprecating and patronizing and find a better solution, a more permanent solution to deal with that conflict at work, right? And I can take that into that space as well because I am accustomed to that. And that doesn't mean I shut myself off. It simply means I use my emotions to inform me rather than control me.
So I love that. I love the idea of letting go of control because a lot of people struggle with that. So sending out that job application or starting a new business or asking somebody you fancy out for a date, it's like once you do your part, then it's like just wait for the universe to respond because you have no control. So managing yourself during that time when you're anticipating the results of your efforts, I think that's really key.
Oh my gosh. And it's so difficult right now. I have a book proposal into my publisher and I'm just waiting. I'm literally just waiting to hear back. I can't
Yeah, I
control
know
what
that
they say to
feeling
the
as an author.
Yeah, because I literally don't know. Will I have a job for the next 2 years or no? Like, somebody
Yeah,
tell me, for the love of God. But it's
all the
not in my
struggle is
control. So what
real.
all this struggle's real. But you know what
Yeah.
I can do? I can have this amazing podcast. I can have this incredible conversation with Celine. And then maybe afterwards I can sit down and hone my craft. I can become a better writer, right? While I wait. And if I am rejected, which I might be, even though I think it was like the best proposal ever in the history of the world, right?
Yeah.
I might be rejected. What will I do then? How will I respond to that? That is in my control. The rejection itself or the acceptance is just not, right? But what I do afterwards is. So it's finding that and grounding yourself in it on a daily basis and finding your power in it. Extraordinary thing to do, and you might have been able to tell by my raised pitch that I'm quite anxious, and letting go of this and just waiting is actually very difficult for me.
Oh, yeah.
And yet I do it every day.
Yeah, I think this letting go of control and surrendering to whatever might come your way, it's hard, and I think it's something that we have to learn and have certain practices to keep us in that space because it's a struggle to do that. What tools do you recommend for people who are in that space of waiting and getting anxious
Yeah.
about, hey, I don't know what's going to happen. I haven't heard from them in a while, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to get the results I want. What advice do you have for people who are in that place?
Well, Celine, the first step would be to recognize what you have just highlighted for your audience, which is not everything is in your control. You do have power in this world, so do other people, right? It's a complex world of power dynamics. Not everything is up to you, right? And so your sense of ability to influence things has a border at some point. It might be movable, by the way, as you gain external power in the world, but it still exists. You are not impenetrable, right? So that's the first step is recognize it. And then the second step is here's a myriad of tools. One of them, meditation, right? To learn how to release that control. One of them, discomfort embracing, to learn how to live with the discomfort of not knowing. One of them, be aware of that anxiety. The anxiety is informative. Anxiety is a great thing because it helps you plan. Because if your mind can take you through, well, what would happen if they say no to me? Well, at least I know that I became a better author while I waited than I was before. And then I can develop this counter plan. So I utilize my anxiety in order to formulate plan B, plan C, right? And to have a preparedness response. Instead of just living in it and drowning myself in it and just being immobilized by it, right? I utilize it, I use it. And then I come to dominate it. And I find the usefulness. Same thing with fear, with anger. All of these emotions are extremely informative. You're afraid of the saber-toothed tiger because it will eat you. So you must run. That is helpful, right? That is helpful information. But if you're afraid to the point of being frozen, then you will get eaten. So that's what you want to avoid. And you also want to avoid constantly running from everything that may or may not have fingernails because you'll never have companionship in your life, right? So, and seeing those distinctions. So, going back to what I can control, going back to knowing that I can live with the discomfort of that which I can't control, right? And habituating myself to it. And then again, focusing, what can I do today? If the goal is to be a good writer, say, right? Or a good parent, it's not about what I did yesterday, what I said yesterday, what I submitted, how I'm waiting for people to respond. It's about what I am capable of in this moment and how I can better myself and how I can find honor in that work and not in the result.
Mm, that is so powerful. I love that because it puts you in the driver's seat of your life and it removes
Yeah.
any sense that you have no agency on what happens to you. Because that's a horrible feeling to have. So thank you for that encouragement and reminding everyone that they are true manifestors in their life and they can create the reality that they want. Yeah, let's end our conversation here. I really appreciate you being here with us
Oh,
and
it's
sharing
been
your
great fun.
insights with us. It's been wonderful learning from you, and I'm sure that our audience feels the same way.
Thank you so much. I feel like I've learned a lot through this conversation as well. So I appreciate your time and your intellectual energy.
Well, thank you for that. I want to let our listeners and viewers know that if you want to learn more about Shermin Kruse's book, Stoic Empathy, The Roadmap to Influence, Leadership, and Integrity, please visit her website, shermankruse.com. The link will be in the description.